Welcome to episode 43 of Quarantine. I'm Peter Hirschberg, and think about this. We've been into this for 43 since the start of this pandemic. And if we look forward, we realize we're about to celebrate our 50th. And we realize that our 50th is going to land right around November 3rd, which is, of course, when America heads into tomorrow, and an uncertain tomorrow at that. So welcome to the beginning of a series that helps us think about how we plan for tomorrow when we're not sure what that is and realize we have to make it. Our show today is called Uncommon Allies. And Mickey, why don't you join me and we can set up this extraordinary conversation today. How you doing?
Hey, Peter. I'm doing really well. I'm super excited today. The two guests that we have, Ayse and Kaye, are friends of mine and inspiration for me. So I'm particularly excited about this. And the topic today is going to be uncommon allies. And actually, in even the planning for this show, we ended up having kind of really fascinating, deep conversations about how do we find uncommon allies, particularly in this time of a triple set of pandemics, both structural racism and the real virus and all sorts of other things. And so actually what I'd love to do is bring on our guests today, Kaye and Ayse, just so they can introduce themselves. And then we'll jump into it. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Mickey and Peter.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, guys.
So maybe Ayse, could you just say maybe just a sentence about yourself, and then we'll drill in a little bit more, and the same thing with Kaye. So Ayse, just who are you?
Oh man, in one sentence.
Yeah.
I'm Ayse Birsel, and I'm the co-founder of Birsel Plus Sec. We're an innovation and design firm based in New York. I am a designer, a mother, and an author. How about that?
Wow, all right. That was pretty good. Kaye, how about you?
Sure thing. I had the same reaction as Ayse did, which is a sentence. Anyway, what I do now, I do a combination of things. I call it a portfolio life. Part of the portfolio is strategic advising for companies who are going through transformations. I sit on a variety of boards, particularly boards that enable me to fulfill the philanthropic commitments that I have. I teach, guest lecture at Stanford and at Columbia, and I'm a mom of two what I believe are amazing children. And I spend most of my time trying to be a good human being in the world.
And you came out of an amazing corporate career, and as we'll learn a bit later, you're part of one of the most interesting organizations in San Francisco, the Glide Foundation.
Yes.
So I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start with Ayse. So Kaye, we'll see you a little bit later. And then Mohib, our producer, can you bring up my other shared screen, the whiteboard? And so Ayse is going to help me today, and we're going to try out using Mural to capture what's going on. And we're starting with actually all of us. So here are some nice drawings of us. And
did you do these, Mickey? Did you freehand these?
No, Ayse. This is Ayse. Ayse, tell us about the one that we're looking at here. That's actually you.
Oh yeah. So this was my New Year's card a couple years back, 2018, and I did a self-portrait, but then wrote some of my values inside it, like a beginner's mind, which I know, Mickey, you're really interested in, and practice, optimism, empathy, seeing the big picture, collaboration, and inspiration, play, people, and then I think iteration.
I think iteration is nice because you've got it on both ears. Like you try with one ear.
I have it on both ears.
Yeah. With the other one.
Listen to other people. But also, Mickey, if you scroll a little bit, we have this snapshot of us talking and planning this session end of July. So
Oh
I
yeah.
found that completely by serendipity. When I was looking for other images, I was like, hold on 1 second, that's us.
Yeah, this
Goes
was
to
Kaye
show
and
how
Ayse
much
and
long planning
Peter and
goes
I just
into
trying to
these
think
things.
through this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ayse, let's start with maybe post-it number 2. Tell us a little bit about design the life you love and your passion. Like I'd like to know what's going on with that and share with everybody who's watching what you've been focusing on.
Sure, it's one of my favorite stories, actually. So many years ago, I was part of Women Presidents Organization, and we were at a session where we were asked to define our mission in 1 sentence. And I was young, and I was part of this group. I was the only designer. Everybody else was like had companies and like accounting and lawyers and things like that. And I thought, I didn't take it very seriously. And I thought to myself, what could I say that will just include the fact that I'm a designer? So I just said, my mission in life is to design the life I love. And I said in this moment, and my friends from that group have since told me that they've never forgotten that sentence. I don't know why I said it, but that it was something that kind of followed me after that. And so soon after that, I met Bibi, my husband and partner, and we fell in love. We, in quick succession, had 2 daughters, became partners, create the design business together. And
Bibi, they say something about Bibi because he's just an amazing designer as well. And so the 2 of you are both product, industrial designers, sort of experienced designers. You met, you fell in love, and Bibi, also does just wonderful work. Can you say a sentence or 2 about him?
Yeah, well, I could tell you how we fell in love. First of all, Bibi is an automobile designer. So in 2002, Renault, the French automobile manufacturer, asked me to design a concept interior for them. And I knew nothing about cars. So I said, I need somebody from your side to mentor me. And they sent Bibi, but they basically told me before Bibi came, oh, you're going to love him. And apparently they told Bibi the same thing, you're going to love her. So, we just followed the instructions. So
I think this is our first uncommon allies, it was just sort of what's going to happen.
I mean, it goes to show to what point I listen to my clients, right?
They told you to do it. So design the life you love. What has this turned into? It's kind of snowballed into something really beautiful.
It snowballed into, so then I, at one point started, like I had been designing all kinds of things from office systems to potato peelers and toilets and whatnot. But I wanted to develop my methodology. And so I did like a journey into my head, figuring out how I think, how do I go from like what I know today to what I can imagine for tomorrow? And what's that process? And from that developed this idea of deconstruction, reconstruction, which you're so good, Mickey. Well done. So deconstruction, reconstruction is how I think, and it has 4 steps, more or less. Deconstruction is you take the whole apart and see what something is made up of. And then you then look at those same parts from different perspectives and develop.
But you're talking about like your own life, like pulling your life out and holding it in your hand like a product and deconstructing it and saying, what is my life? What are the parts? Is that what you mean?
When you bring deconstruction, reconstruction together with your life, yes, but you can bring it together with anything. So you can take apart anything, even chicken soup. And I think you and I did that at one point.
What is chicken soup?
Yeah. And the reason we take, Ayse, the reason we take it apart is to reframe, to look at things anew, to understand something better, to get out of some specific.
That's one side of it, Peter. Another side of it is really because, one, we want to break something apart so that the smaller parts are easier to manage. So it takes a complex something like our life, and by breaking it into smaller pieces, you make it more manageable. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is also we have so many preconceptions about how things go together. And when you break something apart, you're also breaking your preconceptions of like, oh, this has to go with that. And once you break all the links between things, you can decide, okay, well, I don't want this, take that out. I want this in, put that in. I want to mix this with that. And you just create a new combination of things, which is reconstruction, the other side of deconstruction. And when you reconstruct something, what's important is realizing you can't have everything. And that really, I think, is at the heart of design is you can't have everything. So what are the pieces you're going to choose? And then from that, you go to an expression, and the expression could be a product, it could be a strategy, it could be an experience, it could be your life.
So this was what you had been doing for a long time, for like designing new furniture systems for Herman Miller, working with General Electric to do sorts of things. So first you saw that's what you did as a designer, right, in a designerly way. And then you said, wow, could you do this for yourself? Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so once I had Deconstruction Reconstruction, this methodology, somehow this idea of my life being a design project came back. And then I thought to myself, wouldn't that be an interesting proof point for my process if I can deconstruct and reconstruct my life? And then I was talking to a friend of mine, Shirley Moulton, who had just started Academy of Life about learning lessons you don't learn at school. And she was like, why don't you do a workshop about that? That sounds really interesting. Yeah, and I was like, okay, I had never done a workshop before. This is, I don't know, like 10 years ago. And one day I found myself in front of like 12 people who were interested in designing their life. And I said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to deconstruct and reconstruct your life. And before that, I had to kind of create my own curriculum. So I created exercises, tried them out myself, and then kind of thought they kind of worked. And then did that first workshop. And those people told their friends, they were like, there's this woman who's like teaching us how to design our lives. And they told their friends told their friends, and the whole thing grew word of mouth. So that.
But can you tell us what you thought you wanted to be when you deconstructed your own life and you started kind of thinking through that for your own self? I seem to remember this picture. There was sort of, well, there were different things. You had one that was like kind of Katy Perry almost or something.
Yeah, I should put that in.
Tell us about that. About your own, who you redesigned yourself as.
So before I get to Katy Perry, one thing I did realize, one of the tools that we use in design, and I also use in this book, is metaphors. I love using metaphors in design thinking. And I learned that from a friend of mine, Jim Long, who used to be the head of research at Herman Miller, where they had done this study around large corporations, and they had asked people to describe a large corporation through a metaphor. So people would say things like, oh, we're a beehive, or we're a zoo. And the magic of metaphors is that it can really help you understand complex things or things you don't know using similar things. Like when you say a beehive, you might not know what that organization is. You have an idea. You're like, oh, okay, that must be a very disciplined, highly productive place. Everybody is working under a queen bee. You make up your own ideas. Like if you say our organization is like a circus, you're like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? A circus could be out of control, like a 3-ring circus. It could also mean that you have all these talented people performing in front of everybody else, like again and again, and doing amazing things. So anyways, ooh, nice.
I'm just trying to keep up with you, Ayse.
Yeah, nice drawings.
It's my beehive in my circus.
Yeah.
So that was a way you found to actually help yourself.
So I was going to tell you, if I may, the metaphor for myself, which really helped explain me to me, was that I'm a tree. And I still like this metaphor because I think that my roots are in Turkey, so that's where I grew up, right? And that's my kind of essence and culture. But then the trunk of my tree, where it comes out of the ground, is in New York. This is where I grew up as a designer and as a person. And then, and when I started thinking like a tree, I thought to myself, what's my future? And my future is about giving fruit and helping other trees grow. And that really is what I'm doing now, which is all about like teaching deconstruction, reconstruction, or design methodology to anyone and everyone, from ages as young as 13 to as young as 92, through our common and shared project, which is our life. So what I love about Design the Life You Love is actually it's my the secret is it's my way of teaching how to think like a designer to everyone.
I love it.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about where do you want to go next with this conversation? I know you put out some Post-it notes kind of on the whiteboard, and where would you like to go next? Do you want to fill in my query on the Katy Perry thing that I remember you saying, or do you want to keep moving and tell us a little bit more about your process?
Yeah, it's enough about me. Enough about me. Just one thing about thinking like a designer, because I think that's foundational. While I have everybody, if you want to go back to your just under your circus is thinking like a designer.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the general framework of you don't need to be a designer to think like a designer. All you need are these 5 qualities. One is optimism, no matter how hard the problem, this belief that you're going to come up with a better solution. Then empathy for yourself and others. Thinking holistically, seeing the big picture so that you can connect the dots in new and different ways. And then asking what if questions, which is all about having an open mind. And then working collaborative, which is like what we're doing together here as uncommon allies. And I find this framework incredibly inspiring and powerful, especially today inside all the challenges that we have. It's like remembering to have optimism and to collaborate, to solve complex problems. So anyways, but from that, let's continue towards collaboration, because I wanted to ask Kaye and Peter.
Okay, perfect.
Nikki, I've asked you this many times, so I'll skip you, but actually, one of my favorite tools from Design the Life You Love is asking people about their heroes. So, but first, before we enter heroes, Kaye and Peter, think about your superpowers.
So let's bring Kaye on.
Yeah, and then your kryptonite.
Mohib, if you can bring Kaye up.
Hi.
Perfect.
And this idea of superpowers and kryptonite, actually, Nikki inspired me to think in these dualities, because he was like, heroes all have superpowers, but they also have kryptonite, their Achilles heel. So now I love his pair.
Energy. Yeah. Sometimes it's just like even Superman, has kryptonite. And so what is it that saps your energy? But do you want to start, Ayse? We'll ask each of them to think for a minute or two about heroes in their own life, I think, not, and what is their superpower? So it could be just everyday heroes in your own life. And who are they? So,
you're stepping a step. Come back.
Take it. You're in control here. Sorry. I get excited.
One thing at a time. First, just take a minute to think about what's your superpower, Kaye, and what's your kryptonite. And Peter, same for you.
So it's interesting. I think that my superpower and kryptonite are shades of the same thing. So my superpower is clearly compassion. I have a depth of compassion, the ability, probably closer to empathy, truly the ability and the intellectual curiosity about the lives of others and putting myself in the lives of others, and the ability to really, from a place of inquiry and honoring, the dignity of others, really trying to understand and to solve or be innovative in terms of approaches from that place. And I do that whether I am in a client system, I do that if I'm at Glide, wherever I am, that is the stand that I take. And you could imagine that carried to an extreme, that in terms of energy, that can be quite debilitating, if you will, and in the context of our current environment with racial and social unrest. I have been facilitating safe spaces for people of color, particularly Black women and Black men, to have conversation about the duality of their life and the ability to show up as whole, productive individuals, professionals in a professional setting, while dealing with all of the microaggressions, the trauma, and all of the things that are a part of being a Black person in this country. And I'm able to do that because not because I'm a Black woman, but because I really can find myself rooted in their stories. But after I've done a couple of those, as I did yesterday, I'm just wiped out. And it's part of my journey is trying to find the balance.
So
Beautiful, Kaye.
it's almost the same thing, compassion, but too much of it can really drain you because you have to put yourself
It's exactly
out there.
the same thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
And what about Peter? Peter, what do you think your superpower is?
Yeah, I think it's around creating narrative or meaning or putting a bunch of disparate things together to get a sense for a future you might not known about. And sometimes that just is very literal, like in the work that I've done in the tech industry, where you work with an entrepreneur where there's all this stuff, and then you come up with some narrative that explains it to them and explains it to the public. And when I was at Apple very early on, we had to figure out why you wanted a computer, why you wanted something online, why big data mattered. And these things oftentimes were complex concepts, particularly, it's like you would want to explain it to a broader audience. Mickey, you and I were both at the Aspen Institute when I did a project on explaining big data, and we brought all sorts of artists in because we wanted to explain it to people of our parents' generation and make them think they understood it and feel good about it. And even if you look at what we're doing with Quarantine, we're documenting something in real time, and we're interested in a narrative on how to get somewhere at a time when that's confusing. So, I mean, it's all I think it's wrapped up around that. Boy,
Tell us about your kryptonite.
Yeah,
like what saps your energy?
Yeah, the flip side of that is, if you're deeply interested in history and in the future, there are like only so many of these you could actually focus on and do. And so you could get distracted, right? You could start down a lot of paths, or a lot of people could want that. And I think what I find is something that's meaningful and satisfying is really sticking with something and following through and turning it into something that ships, because I respect that. And so it's easy to get. You have to artificially say just a few things because there's a lot of interest.
It's like
Hey, Peter, if I may, Mickey, can I ask Peter a question?
Yeah. Okay.
How do you choose? I mean, is it instinct? Is it a particular area of interest? I mean, because just listening to you just now, I could think of a multitude of ways in which the art of storytelling could bring a level of, I won't say simplicity, but could bring a level of access to something that could be a particularly complex topic. I think of like genomic sequencing, for instance.
I spent on some level, it's also wrapped up to when you see a set of trends coming, they suggest a set of things. For example, there was a moment when I was both chairman of Technorati, that was one of the first social media search engines, right? So suddenly this was the beginning of power shifting to the audience, away from brands, away from news. And at the same time, I was creating Gray Area, that was an art and technology organization. And we were looking at how do you apply that in the civic sphere. So there was just a whole set of things that I was working on all at once that was around this movement from top down to decentralized, which was a movement, right? I mean, there was, by the way, ever since then, perhaps there is the downside of radical democratization and the lack of curating, but let's put that aside. As that stuff was happening, it was exciting. So I was picking projects. I was both leading a company in it, building a nonprofit in it, and peeling that onion back. How do you get citizens in the city engaged? It was so clear that, for example, what I'd seen in media, audience engagement, you could do with civic projects. You could do urban prototyping, have people in the Tenderloin come up. So I was basically picking things that tried to hang together. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, very helpful. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
That was a cool question.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. It's great to kind of get into your minds about your superpowers and kryptonite. And now, let's get to what Mickey was saying, which is talking about your heroes. And so the heroes question is, our heroes are just interesting people. You know, they're not necessarily superheroes. It's they're people that maybe we know of, their family or friends or mentors or mentees, or people we know of. You know, we don't know them personally, but we know of them. And so I just want both of you, Peter and Kaye, to think about who your heroes are, but also what are their qualities. So you can just think of, for our purposes now, maybe one hero and the qualities of that hero. What is it about them that interests you and inspires
And these
you?
have to be people that we know that are alive.
They don't need to be. They can also be, you know, historic figures.
Yeah, okay, fine.
And you don't really have to know them in person.
Yep.
It's up to you. They can also be fictional characters.
So we're going to give them a minute or two to think about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Kay's like, I'm on this.
It's on top of my head. And it's interesting. It's my mom who passed away, recently. And it is the arc of her life that caused me to think of her as a superhero. So she was one of 8 children, 7 brothers, and she was the eldest girl. And at 16 years of age, my grandmother took her out of school so she could help care for and raise her 7 brothers. And all of her brothers became professionals, lawyers, doctors, educators, etc. And what I saw in my mother, the heroism in my mother was, we come from a small village of modest means, but my mother always operated in the world as a giant. And giant on so many levels, the size of her heart, the intention. She was some person I learned intentionality from, and she didn't have the language of intentionality. But what I saw with her is she had this ability to see and inspire greatness in others that they didn't even see in themselves. And I saw her do that with everything from little kids who would stop by or a house on the way from school, and she would quiz them about school and how they were doing and remind them of, the responsibility they had, and she expected so much of them, all the way to people who were struggling with alcoholism and substance abuse and, not having a treatment center or an approach for them. My mom would talk with them about life on the other side of whatever demon they were dealing with. And it was just remarkable to watch how, without any formal training, she just had this ability to live her life in a way that, I talk about wanting to, when I leave the earth, I want to be all used up. I don't want to have anything left. my mother truly lived life that way. And for all of those reasons, her resourcefulness, the size of not just her heart, but her intellect was just something. And that for me is she's just a giant in my eyes.
What sapped
That's
her
so
energy?
beautiful.
What would have been the kryptonite? What really got her?
She would never admit it, but
Yeah.
it is because of the depth of caring. She took on everyone's, whether it was there was no challenge and no problem that my mother didn't take on. And she was tireless about that. And then the last thing I'll say about her, which also inspires me, is, and I think it is because she didn't have quote unquote formal education, she was tireless about learning. When she went into the hospital before she passed away, she always had either a Bible or a book and the dictionary and a pen. So when she passed away in the hospital, she had the Bible, a book she was reading, and the dictionary, and she would always write words down. And that, that is, I do that to this day. I have a whiteboard in my office, and every day I try to come across another word that I don't know the meaning of. So this has been actually very good for me. Thank you.
I love this tireless,
That's
just learner
beautiful.
till just all the time. I love that.
Yeah.
Peter, we need to ask you the same question. A superhero that you see that, has some power that you just love, that you find inspiring.
Right. I mean, I tend to go to interesting figures in history that influenced me. For example, Vannevar Bush, who kind of organized all of big tech for President Roosevelt and foresaw the internet coming, and I think led to kind of a lot of the current era. But the person in our history who most inspires me, especially at the moment, I think, is Teddy Roosevelt. This is a guy who grew up very privileged, but then when he was police chief in New York, kind of saw how the other half lived and was there right at that Gilded Age moment when capitalism was kind of like losing control. And somehow he was a president who landed us through the progressive era, brought in all of these changes in child labor and in the economy and stuff, probably prevented the nation from going fascist and socialist. So similar to now. And plus, he was this like complex, larger-than-life guy who spent the rest of his time hiking around with John Muir and getting the parks established. To me, it's quintessentially American, and it's just intersecting at the right time to solve a problem. And that's just like.
How would you describe that superpower, either Vannevar Bush or Teddy Roosevelt? Like if it were like across his chest as a Superman, or if you bought a package that said Teddy Roosevelt's, AKA something, he's got a name.
Yeah, well, I think in his case, to Kaye's point, I think that there was a lot of empathy there because he kind of did understand both sides of the equation, and he could, I think he could bring an understanding across both of those things there. And he also, by the way, he understood uncommon allies. He partnered with the muckrakers to get something done. And so it was a combination of that plus a really good heart. I mean, our current president partners with the press and knows how to be larger than life, but uses it for not good purposes. This guy had a combination of just a really good intent and a very good way to exercise stuff. I mean, another person in that tradition.
He was a journalist who wrote books and mixed it up. And I think there's a relationship that I just heard that reminded me a little bit of what Kaye said earlier on, which was getting proximal, getting close to the problem. You always hear about the kind of he rolled up his sleeves and jumped into the arena. He did those things, and I do think that it wasn't he was sitting on the sidelines. He was opening up parks. He was dressing up in undercover outfits and doing sting operations when he was running New York, and trying to figure out slumlords and what they were doing. Peter, what for either, you mentioned Teddy Roosevelt, what sapped his strength? Like what just was his kryptonite? Like what got him every time?
Did his vision get ahead of him when he ran on the Bull Moose Party, right? He put in place a president who was his successor. It didn't work out, and he wasn't able to capture it back. So,
Well, his vice president turned out to be a little bit of his kryptonite. If you read the
Right.
story, The Bully Pulpit, from Doris Kearns
Yes.
Goodwin,
Yep.
it was a great vice president, not a great president sort of thing.
Mm.
Ayse, where do we want to go from here? This is fun.
Oh, so this is so much fun. Thank you so much, Kaye and Peter. And I want to turn your heroes back at you and say, Kaye, you operate as a giant, and you have the heart and the intellect of a giant, and you're intentional. You see and inspire greatness in others, even when they don't see it themselves, and you live your life fully, and you're resourceful, and you're tireless about learning. And even though we've only met recently, I can say these things, and I know I'm right. And and Peter, you are someone who brings in great change, especially to things that are complex. You yourself are complicated and larger than life, and you have this ability, incredible ability, to intersect at the right time, right place to solve big problems. And you do have a good heart, but you do make things happen. And so,
by the way, Peter, you lived a very privileged life growing up too, and you ended up, you really, there was an interesting parallel with Teddy Roosevelt, because you were able to walk New York streets and go to the World's Fair and learn about, what it's like to build a global catalog empire, from your grandfather and things like that. So you're able to do that, but even what you're doing with the Gray Area Foundation, with Prototype Market Street, bringing on artists from around the world to prototype from Ferry Building all the way to the unemployment office, and engaging everybody to try to think about how can we actually, how can we really be in the arena? How can we do things? I think it comes through. This is what I fell in love with the first time I met.
Yeah. Sorry, Mickey, I have to just tell Kaye and Peter that the reason that I can do this, and where I think, Mickey, maybe you were going, I just want to make sure that we don't leave this without explaining heroes, is that basically you gave me an opportunity to turn your heroes back to you and say what you see in people who inspire you are actually your own values. And that's why you connect with them at that level. And that's why I could say, hey, they are you. Kaye, you are your mom. And Peter, you are Roosevelt. Not exactly, but in terms of your values. And what's interesting is our values, when you want to design something, you need values to help you decide. Because design is all about creating permutations of ideas. And Kaye, when you were asking Peter, like, how do you choose? You create permutations of ideas, many different combinations, but then how you choose is based on your values. So if your values are humanistic, compassionate, positive, you choose based on those things. If your values are not like that, which is what we're seeing so much of today, you choose and you move people away from humanism and the common good. But so that's what I try to do, and I love it because you're both of your heroes, very different but very telling, and it's also a great way to get to know people. I feel like now I have a window into you both that I didn't have 2 minutes ago. And maybe just Mickey, I want to talk about like how this came about, because when I first started Design the Life You Love, and I had people in these, rooms, right? We would do them at School of Visual Arts, and I would have people sitting in a library, and I would want them to design. And when you're designing, you need inspiration. But I didn't have time to tell them, okay, well, go to MoMA, or like listen to beautiful music, or like watch a nice, a great film. And I was like, how can I inspire people? And I realized I could inspire people through other people. So I started asking them about their heroes, but I didn't make this, I didn't have this reveal. It was just like, oh, think about your heroes. Oh, Kaye, your mom is your hero and she had the giant heart. That's beautiful. And that was it. I wouldn't go beyond that.
Hey, Ayse, I have a question.
Sure.
Two questions. One is, who comes to design their life? Is this mostly younger people? Is it older people who are changing because they're getting older and life is changing? I'm interested in the demographic. And then the second question is, what's happened during this whole plastic quarantine time when suddenly what our dreams change, what life is changed, people kind of get disconnected from their future, and what's a design practice like today?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the demographics of Design the Life You Love is 90% women. Now, if I change the name to Design the Work You Love, it immediately becomes 50-50.
And you've done those. I remember coming
I've experimented with that. Yeah.
Experiment, and Beth Comstock was there, but also some senior like CTO of Siemens or of SolidWorks or something. I was like, whoa, okay. And it was fascinating, but it was, and what about when you change it to design other things like design X you love?
So and I just also wanted to answer Peter's question about like, how about older people? I've also learned, because we just finished a 1.5 year long study with the SCAN Foundation, asking people who are 65 and older to design their life, and found out that there's no age to designing your life. You can be 92, 93 years old and still interested in designing your life. Because when we started the study, I was like, what are these people going to tell me? Are they going to tell me I'm kind of too late? Where were you like 30 years ago? No, they were like, I'm doing it. Like, even if I have a day, I'm ready to design my life. It was just beautiful. Yeah.
And you did this across the country. You did this in small towns. You did this in New York. You did this in LA. You did this in other things. What give us 1 or 2 nuggets that you got out of design, the latter part of your life that you love? And then I want to switch back to Kaye and actually just talk about the kind of work you're doing now and what's going on. But I'd love you to drill in a little bit, Ayse, on the work you did with the
SCAN Foundation.
The SCAN Foundation.
Yeah, TFF. The beginning of that project was, most of the research that's been done around older people is based on worries. It's all about mostly a reductionist perspective of like, okay, you're aging, you're older, or your health is going to go, somebody's going to die, your income is going to go down. It's all like, when you hear all of that, it kind of flattens you out. You have no more kind of, I don't know, life energy. And our perspective on it was like, this can't be. And I come from a culture, the Turkish culture, that respects older people so very much. Almost kind of like, Kaye, what you were saying, it's both the superpower and the kryptonite, because when you do too much of that, then, as a younger person, you don't have a voice.
Right.
But when you don't respect your elders, you don't realize how much they have to offer you, these wise people. So in a way, the research with the SCAN Foundation was an opportunity to really respect and embrace older people's perspective. And the thing that we learned from them was that it's actually not, older life. First of all, this life didn't exist before, right? 50 years ago, people didn't live into their 80s and 90s. My grandparents certainly didn't do that. Like, they passed in their 70s, and everybody was like, oh, that's a good life. Now 70 is too young for us, right? So these people are like astronauts of longer life. They're going where nobody has gone before, and there are no roadmaps. Nobody has really like solved for them. And there are very few good products, there are very few good services and experiences. So in a way, this is a quest for like, there is this beautiful 20-25 extra years of life. What do people want? And so what we learned from them, co-designing their life, their long life with them, is that they want the same things we want. And that was the beauty of this research, is no matter what your age, people want love, both like love, but also intimate love, sex, and they want friendship, they want purpose, and doing the work they love, and they want vitality. So, and then when you start to realize that you could be 20 years old and you'd want these things, and you might be 50 years old, or you might be 70 or 80 years old. We all want the same thing. It's just that how we get to them and how we experience them might be different. And so, and that could really change. Like when you think of Tinder doesn't work for somebody who's like 70 years old. They have so much richness that can't be like flattened down to a picture, right? And so you have to come up with like a new Tinder, and that might actually help everybody else. If you can create a dating app that takes into consideration the whole experience of a person, not just their visual qualities, that might pay off for all of us. So anyways, that's the idea.
And
what I love about this too, though, is that now there is in LA, you've worked with John, who was part of that foundation, and now he's starting a fund and an accelerator for founders, so young founders, to actually say, getting old sucks, or getting old is wonderful, but products for them suck. Let's actually help people make these things that would be wonderful for you in your next chapter. What would be wonderful as we get older. Peter, you and I have had conversations even during quarantine of trying to encourage your mom, who's in her maybe 90s, late 80s. I'm trying to remember how old is your mom, Peter?
93.
Yeah, 93. I know you and your brother got together and made like a little video to try to convince her to not go outside, to drink a lot of water, to do some things. And so, but she's a force of nature. You said she was on the board of directors of something up until very recently.
NPR, yeah, that's right.
NPR, yeah.
She's also, as you know, has been my great technology foil, because she is a font of common sense. And I'll come home, she's the great test of do you make sense or not. But you also saw the video I did for her about the Internet of Things, when I gave her an Internet of Things. I gave my mother this device that you stick in your kitchen, and it reads how many eggs are there and tells you over Wi-Fi. And she was trying to figure out why one would ever need this. It was very funny.
It was hilarious.
I represented somebody who showed up from Silicon Valley.
She's like, why don't I just go into the fridge and look to see if I need eggs? What are you talking about?
We'll show the videos.
I've got to figure out Wi-Fi. What's Wi-Fi with eggs?
That's great. Your mom
video,
keeps
by the
you
way,
honest.
we should post that somewhere, because it's delightful. It's a nice Christmas.
Maybe we'll show it at the end of the show today as a treat, once we get a little further.
Yes. But I want to shift to Kaye now. Kaye and Ayse and I are going to kind of interview a little bit about this, but what's the work you love? What are you doing right now that you just love what you're doing?
There's a lot of that, but I mean, I can talk to you about the glide work, because that is work that I truly love. And our founder, Cecil Williams, Reverend Cecil Williams, just turned 91 years of age, and we just celebrated his birthday yesterday. We've been celebrating it all month, but yesterday we had probably one of the largest Zoom birthdays that we had hundreds of people all over the world popping in and wishing him happy birthday, and everybody from Michael Franti singing to him. So it was very special. And
what is glide? What is glide?
Glide, we're in the
I want to make sure. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
In the Tenderloin, corner of Taylor and Ellis. In 9 years, we will celebrate 100 years, which will also be the 100th birthday of Cecil Williams. So we are already preparing for his 100th birthday. Look, the reason I like Glide is because, or at least I appreciate, and I consider it an honor, I serve as the chair of the board of trustees of the foundation. And at its core, Glide is a nonprofit that is in the Tenderloin, was birthed out of the Tenderloin, and is probably one of very few places where its aspiration or its stated aspiration informs how the work is experienced. So Cecil Williams, 50 years ago, forgive me, said the work, and he's a minister by training, and he said, the church is not a building. The church is in each and every one of us, and therefore he wanted to be in the community, serving others in the community, and the language he uses is radical inclusion and unconditional love. And when he talks about unconditional love, he really means it, and you see that expressed in the programs and services. We use language to describe the men and women who we serve. We call them our clients. And the reason we call them our clients is because as a client, you have agency in the relationship, right? If you're a client, you can give me feedback, right? You can tell me the food was cold. You can tell me the coffee wasn't as good today as it was yesterday. And for him, that is about the restoration of human dignity, because at its core, it recognizes that your dignity and being included is not conditioned upon your socioeconomic status. He would even say, I don't care how you smell. And I mean, when you talk about the radical way in which he shows up, inspires all of us to show up. And truly loves from that place of it breaks down every single barrier, and you see him with the people that we serve, and he is like a hero to them. And in many ways, being a part of that organization has transformed my life into what is possible. What is possible when we see, this is my point about getting proximal to people, it does change you. And therefore our work, we believe, is about personal transformation. It isn't just about come and volunteer. We are in the business of transforming lives. And the experience is what transforms you. It creates an access point for personal transformation. So it's why I love that work.
The people who are the volunteers become transformed in the process of engaging with the community.
Absolutely.
More alive, aware, all that stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. No question about it, Peter.
Kaye, one of the things that I just love about this, and I met you because as a BCG senior advisor, I tuned in to the senior advisor chats, I don't know, a year or two ago, or I was probably at one of the meetings, and I had just joined, and you were a senior advisor who had been a, leader in industry, and you were doing all this stuff, but you were coaching. And there was an element to that of like leadership coaching and things like that, that is about kind of unconditional positive regard. You have to believe the person can actually grow. You have to believe they can grow. And what you just described now is so beautiful because it's, weaves through the other parts of your life too. That, I didn't know about.
It's who I am, right? It's not what I do. So Mickey, it's not what I do, it's who I am, right? If you think about the lesson I learned from my mom, remember I said, my mother had this capacity to see in others and to believe in others greatness beyond what they believed and saw in themselves. And it's that same, that's what we practice at Glide. It's what I practice in the work that I do with coaching and advising CEOs. It's helping them see the possibility within them that sometimes they don't even see or don't even understand. And it's helping them see how tapping into that possibility actually causes an outcome in themselves and therefore allows them to transform a company. Because what happens, as you know, I talk a lot about in BCG as content and character. And, I talk about the fact that in this moment, we are in a character moment. And part of why we're having a disconnect, and I'm not just talking about BCG, I think in general, is because we are addressing a character moment with content. We are looking at strategies. We are looking at systems. We're looking at all of those things which are critical. But what's at the root of it is really getting proximal to each other and understanding what is it that causes you to see the world in a different way than the way I do, which is why this idea of uncommon allies is so inspiring to me, right? And to be an uncommon ally, it means that I've got to open myself up to the possibility that you can change me, right? It doesn't mean it's an uncommon ally and I'm just sitting here listening to you because that's what I have to do. I have to come to you from a place of being open and willingness and acknowledging the possibility that you could change me, not just me changing you. And there's that mutuality, and it goes back to Cecil's talk about that's how transformation happens. It happens in community with each other.
What I love about, when in our earlier talks, you were talking about context is decisive. And I think this relates to what you just said, because you create a different context when you're with me and with Ayse and with Peter. Like it's a new context. I can't just be myself. I have to also react and push and play with the other people that I surround myself with. And tell me a little more about context is decisive. And then I'd love you to talk about, during COVID, your uncommon allies story with Glide. I just think it's beautiful. You have maybe two, but I love the one about the depots and everything and food.
Yeah, so what's interesting, to the point that you made about context is decisive, I also say to people, language is a part of creating context. And I'll give you an example. So right now, in the midst of all companies trying to get more diverse in their workforces, I have leaders who say to me, and the CEO from Wells Fargo just said this a couple of days ago, diversity recruiting, finding diverse talent is difficult. And I say, no, it's different. If it's difficult, it's a hurdle to overcome. It's challenging. We don't know how to do it. If it's different, we suddenly bring a level of innovation. We bring a level of different thinking. We just approach it completely differently than if we say it's difficult. So for me, it's why I pay such attention to language as well, because language is part of what creates context. And what frustrates me at times is I find that sometimes we are, let me use the word careless, or not as careful as we should be with language, because I do believe language, I fundamentally believe language can and does create context. So I just offer that.
Well, and it shapes like the metaphors we use. If I say it's a pitched battle and I'm fighting against the other guy in my company, and that's very different than we're yoked to the same thing and we're pulling towards the future. Those are two very different metaphors, and yet I'm possibly describing maybe externally what it seems like. Yeah,
Kaye,
right.
I love that. On approaching things through content versus character. You said we're in a character moment, and I think you were talking about corporations, not just like the United States and its political situation.
Correct.
And also, as I just think about, okay, if you're off and you're in tech, we're working in the future, we're coming up with ideas. Many times we come at it from the content or the product, but I think you're getting to a deeper concept about both values and so unpack that for me a little bit.
Yeah. So look, we are in a moment of increasing complexity, right? Even if you think about the pandemic, the challenges with the economy, social and civil unrest. There's a lot that's going on. And any system, whether that system is a company, whether the system is the country, whatever system is under some level of challenge and a high degree of complexity. To deal with that complexity, the easiest thing to do is to go after content. We look at strategies, we look at market intelligence, we look at things that we have a word for, and we therefore can access them, simplify them, and find a solution. And part of the challenge is this moment calls for us to address it from a different place. I'll give you a very specific example. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is not a company in the US that's not dealing with this. And what I've said to them is, look, I've been in this game for like 30 plus years, have been involved with hundreds of millions of dollars spent and deployed against that. We address recruiting, we address development, we address promotion. But what we don't address is having the individuals who themselves have to go through a transformation of their belief system about the value of diversity and inclusion. And therefore, we fix the system, but it's the same people operating with the same belief sets, the same mindsets, the same biases in a system that we've changed. And we may get a peak, but it's not sustained. So that's my point about content and character. And I use character loosely, but it really means something beyond just you're a good person or a bad person. It's getting to exactly what you talked about. It's getting to the values, or like I like to say, just because something should be, that can be done, doesn't mean it shouldn't be. But, you know, I don't know if that was helpful or not, Peter, but that's where I'm trying to move organizations, that it's not just the content work. We also have to do the harder work of really starting to understand each other. I mean, I do this with my, talk about uncommon allies, my friends who are loyalists to the Trump administration. I sit with them from the place of, I really genuinely want to understand, because maybe it is that I'm missing something. And I think if I don't get proximal to understanding and engage from a place of openness and respect for the fact that they might be seeing it very differently, I think it keeps us stuck. And I think that is, and look, I get how hard that is, because, you know, it takes, that's one place that saps my energy, by the way.
There's a saying in the venture world that culture trumps strategy every time.
Yes.
That, you know, strategy is what we want to do, and if you, but culture is actually the very powerful thing that will actually get something done or not.
Yeah, I think it's Ben Horowitz who said that, actually, or Andreessen. I think it's either Ben or Andreessen.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So tell us about the uncommon ally experience when suddenly COVID hits and Glide, you know, you're looking at, oh my gosh, how many more unemployed people, how many more people are suddenly going to find out what it's like to be unhoused? And also, what about all the things that just the people you're already serving are going to face now? Yeah.
Yeah, so under normal circumstances, Glide provides anywhere close to 1 million meals every single year on an annual basis.
Gosh.
And within the first 6 months of this year, we're already past that point. And when COVID hit, and the reality of what that meant, and again, there's a large percentage of our population that also are seniors who, in a pandemic, are advised to stay at home. So we also have that complexity in addition to the typical population we had. And we had started to see the demographics on the line starting to shift from individuals to families. And that was just reflective of the rising housing prices and the challenges in San Francisco, because if a family, a mother, father, 2 children can come to Glide and get 3 meals a day, it allows them then to use those resources and shift some of that away to keeping a roof over their head. And we knew all of those safety nets were going to go away. We got a call, talk about uncommon allies. We got a call from a young woman in New York, and she had been recommended to Glide because she had bundled a group of donors who wanted to do something impactful. And she at the same time had heard about the fact that given the downturn in travel, that many of these hubs that provide catered food for the airlines were going to go out of business and lay off workers because they would no longer have a need, because the airlines were, particularly San Francisco, Chicago, and Atlanta. And she brought together what you would consider uncommon allies, donors who were willing to fund individuals who had kitchens and food, because remember, we didn't get a year's worth of notice about COVID. And if you think about the complexity of that supply chain, they have perishable food that they have procured, and they have kitchens. And she came to us and said, if we could provide you guys with meals, catered meals, is that something you could use? And we said, of course we could use that. And the beauty of it was, it wasn't just the catered, we agreed to be the distribution hub. So 3 times a week, they came in with the trucks full of the food, prepared meals. It wasn't even meals that we had to cook, because obviously we had to go to a very narrow kitchen because, again, sheltering in place, maintaining social distancing, not having volunteers, not having our dining room open. So we couldn't even have people in the building to dine. So we brought the catered food from the airlines, that hub, together with distribution, came to Glide, and we were able not just to supply our typical clientele and then the additional clientele, we were able to supply some of the other food services in the city. We also were able to provide food for our seniors who were shut in. We got some of our volunteers to commit to deliver food to some of our shut-ins. And for many of them, that was the only person that they had any contact with. For if we went twice a week, that was the only contact they had twice a week. And then what they did, and we were so appreciative of this, a lot of the shelf-stable food that they had, they also donated it to us. So for people who, if you think about it, if you are unhoused, we don't use the word homeless, we talk about being unhoused, because you always have a home with us. Again, back to language.
Yeah, that's very good.
For many of them, there's no refrigerator to store stuff. So they had shelf-stable dry goods, they had milk, they had things that we could prepare these, we could actually prepare like overnight for some of our unhoused clients, because again, getting across the city, that's part of the other challenge. If you have all of your belongings in a shopping cart, right? Getting across the city with your belongings is just tough unless you are part of a community. And I know that this will strike people as strange, but there are homeless communities, unhoused communities, where people take care of each other, right? So one person will be the runner, he or she will go to Glide, they will collect meals, and the others in the camp will actually take care of their belongings, particularly for individuals who have animals, who have pets. It's really important to make sure that the pets are safe, that they are safe. And it was such a reminder to me of, again, operating from a place of possibility, right? That opened up the aperture for us to just say, what else is possible? It also inspired some of our donors to think of other ways that they could, a lot of the, we had a photographer, for instance, and obviously a lot of his business was, there was no longer, certainly for a couple of months. And he did a project with us, actually photographing homeless people. And for many of them, they do not have, you just don't have a photograph. And for many of them, this was the first time that they could see a photograph of themselves. So it just created, I would say, a momentum and an energy and a sense of innovation around what is possible.
So Mohib, can you bring up the whiteboard again? Just let's see. So I've been trying to track this in our little diagram of interestingness here, and I'm not even sure how well I'm doing. By the way, this was the people in their 60s and 70s. In some ways, are the astronauts, because we didn't have people. They're on the frontier. They're learning about this. But when you were talking, I really was interested. Let me see if I can navigate today. I never really know. Oh, there we go. My fingers work on this tablet. You were talking about Glide and some of the things: unconditional love, radical inclusion, and this. I love this uncommon ally idea of a group of donors in New York City catering services for the airline industry. The airline industry itself, suddenly is going to put a lot of people out of work because nobody's flying. Yep. And keeping a depot open in San Francisco, keeping a depot open, probably kept jobs going, so you didn't have even more families on the street. Absolutely. And this notion of somebody you can trust. Here's an organization that has been able to do 1 million meals a year That's easy for them. They're going to be able to do it. And so I think making that happen is just beautiful. And so I tried to capture a little bit of what you were saying. And then when I zoomed out, I noticed that one last story you had mentioned was the Rabbi and the Mensch. I think I described that right. So I would love you to, and wait, before we go much further, Ayse, I don't know if you had more that you wanted to react with what Kaye just talked about.
Oh, I was just mesmerized, Kaye, but by what you're talking about and the importance of language, but also the things that you're saying. For example, operating from a place of possibility brought me back to the optimism of design. And I thought, oh, that's such a beautiful way of saying that. I want to borrow that from you. And then the other thing that came to my mind is like, I would love to do a design the life you love with the unhoused people that you're working with.
We would love that.
At Glide.
We would love that.
Wouldn't that be, it would be just amazing. So that's what I was thinking, Mickey.
Perfect.
What would be interesting, and we can talk offline, but part of what we are doing now, look, we believe that the future of our work is mobile. That asking people to come to the corner of Taylor and Ellis to be beneficiaries of what we are offering. We understand the value of the monument, of the place, right? There's an important criticality to that. But we also understand that in order for us to scale our impact, we have to go where the need is. So a big part of what we're doing is we've designed this integrated services model, which uses mobile. So we have mobile health clinics, we have mobile food trucks, we are taking what we do in the building and now trying to move it out in ways that offer those services. We call it glide on the go, GG.
Glide on the go, perfect, okay.
Glide on the go. But it's not just taking the services as they exist. And this is where I'm interested, Ayse. We're actually, we've done some work on theory of change, right? Because if our goal is really to lift individuals from their current state, whatever that state is, and to inspire them to envision a different life and a different possibility and use our services and programs in an integrated way to enable and support that transition. Doing that, we've done that in a clinical way. I will share that with you because that's the approach that we've taken. But I love the possibility of doing it through the lens that I've just experienced with you. I think that's really very, very interesting to me.
I love it.
What would you call that workshop? We have to think about language.
Mickey, what's exciting about it is just listening to Kaye, you realize that she's not going to stop at a no of any kind. So whatever this is going to happen. We know that. So
what I just did to you is called a pregnant pause.
Yeah, that's right.
I have plenty of time. I have 9 months. I can just pause and sit.
Yeah. Mickey, you were going to name
it's a little bit after it's a little bit after the hour, and I want to make sure if you all have to leave, but we're kind of into overtime. But I would love it if you can stay for a little longer and explain the Rabbi and the Mensch to us. And and then I want to share a silly little thing at the end about Peter, because I made an action figure of Peter, the superhero, that he just received. And I think there's an interesting story behind what happens when you're given something that loves you and sort of shows that other people have been paying attention to what your powers are. And so I want to end there, but I would love to hear about the Rabbi and the Mensch.
So the story of the Rabbi and the Mensch, we have something at Glide called the Center for Social Justice. And it's really where we house and curate the work that Cecil Williams has been doing for over 50 years around racial justice, social justice. So the work focuses on policy, it focuses on the practice of social justice, We have experiential learning that we do there, this work of transformation. We actually have a program where we take people to Alabama to the lynching museum every year. We have a whole program around that. And out of that, the officer in the Mensch, we have a rabbi who is on staff. And just by walking in the Tenderloin, he noticed the interaction between our uniformed, our police officers or some of those people were our clients, but just the nature of the interaction. And he had a thought that if we use the same kind of principles and values that we had at Clyde around unconditional love, radical inclusion, could you use those principles in a way that would transform the interaction between the police officers and the individuals that they were charged with keeping safe? Could it change the dynamic? And out of that was born this program called A Rabbi and a Mensch. And what he basically does, and we've been doing with the city of San Francisco police department, we have more demand than we know how to fill because we have made progress. We have demand not just from Oakland and other places in California. We now have demand and requests across the country. And it really does, it is grounded in getting these officers, first of all, your uniform creates distance, right? Your uniform in and of itself is a barrier. And instead of
it's a language and a context automatically too.
There you go.
In some ways, yeah, it signals a lot of things.
What are the tools that you have beyond a taser and a gun, right? The tool is your uniform, which is a barrier. And so what he does is he takes them, and we call it before the Tenderloin has woken up. And he takes them out of uniform very early in the morning, and he has them stand literally at the top. And this is about vision. He has them stand at the top there by Market Street and just look straight down and just ask them, what do you see, right? And what do you see when you are not in uniform? And then they walk the Tenderloin with him. They see how he engages with people on the street. And the goal is really to, again, back to proximal, is to shorten the distance between the individuals on the street and the police officers, because you create a different dynamic. And when you start to, because that's also a community that's a viral community, right? If there's an encounter that one of our clients has with a police officer, and it really was a different kind of encounter, that person will speak. It's almost like the old tin cans, if you will.
Yeah, it propagates.
And the police officers work very closely with Glide's security staff. So we have security staff that are trained in our own principles of radical inclusion and unconditional love. And when you watch how the respect that people have for them, the kindness with which they interact with people. I mean, I've seen people who are in the middle of psychotic experiences, and I watch the Glide staff, and I mean, they're trained to get proximal to the person, but with the right amount of understanding. How do you protect that person and yourself? How do you meet them in the eye? How do you de-escalate? Again, all of this is about getting proximal to the individual, and it's about that restoration of their dignity, and you get them to a place where, because there is trust, because that's, and the Glide security officers wear yellow jackets. So you can see them very clearly, you can see them in the Tenderloin. So it's that's what we're attempting to do at an individual level, but at a macro level, it really is in service of the restoration of human dignity, because when I see myself in you, it's grounded in our belief that we're all connected. It's fallacious to believe that we are somehow separate from each other, and this notion that I can't be free. So Cecil Williams says, my liberation is bound up in your liberation. I therefore cannot be free. None of us can be free until all of us are free. And that's what he spent his life operating from that place. So I really do love that program, because it's
That's beautiful.
you talk about really frame busting, right?
Well, and you just mentioned, somebody might be going through a psychotic episode or something like that. Early on, when I was a product designer, I was asked by a subsidiary, actually, of Johnson & Johnson, by Janssen Pharmaceutical at the time. But I was asked to go and interview and visit with some doctors that were dealing with schizophrenia. And we had to watch a documentary called I'm Not There. We had to interview, and then there were a few advocates who were trying to advocate for better mental health policies in Washington, D.C., who were on a balance, but they had been schizophrenic. They had been found on the street when they were 22. They had, and they were fighting a constant battle their whole life. And you learned, and I didn't know this, schizophrenia is a very young disease. It happens right when you go off to college. It's not something,
Absolutely.
Yeah. The break happens, and
prefrontal cortex, my friend.
And it was just such a it was an eye-opening experience, and we ended up trying to help build an early kind of method for humans, for normal people like police officers, healthcare workers, and policymakers, to actually experience what a day in the life of somebody was in San Francisco. And it was kind of beautiful. And ultimately, we asked one of our clients, who was schizophrenic, but he had become an advocate for this, and he was really fighting for it. We asked him to just record a little bit. We didn't want to show people what the experience was. We wanted to record what he felt when he went through the experience, and he hoped people would feel. And it was just so heartbreaking and kind of beautiful. But it was an early sensitizing, I think, that you just have no idea if you don't walk through in someone's shoes. Perspective is a beautiful thing, and it's very hard to get out of your own brain.
You're describing something which works beautifully in a micro close-up sense. An officer, an individual, internal line. We have a national problem with this, in the sense that we're both so pluralistic and so siloed, and you could argue that the whole social media silozation thing is an unproximal thing, since we only hear our own thing. And I'm just wondering, Kaye,
echo chamber.
Since you also work with both you and Mickey work with companies that have scale here, thoughts on how one gets back to that sense of empathy or community, or what Tocqueville saw in America, but what is a bit missing now. It's a big question, but your work really sits at that confluence, and right, that's the great work ahead of us. Well, that was formed as a question. A big question. Either Ayse or Kaye, right? Both of you are. And by the way, the thing that set me thinking about this, I don't know if you saw, there was a wonderful article in the New Republic this week on Robert Putnam's new book called The Upswing. And the title of the article is From I to We. And he basically said the arc of America was, Tocqueville saw this wonderful communitarianism in America, which overcame our individualistic tendencies. And then we kind of lost that in the Gilded Age, and Roosevelt, who we talked about earlier, put it back together. It hit its high water mark in the 50s and the 60s. The communitarianism of the 50s, all that commonality stuff, started leading to the 60s, in which we all wanted to be different and stuff like that. Right. And now Reagan and the rest of it, we've kind of a bit flown apart. And he talks about, how do we put it back together? It's both a hopeful and a history-based book, but it sets up the fact that this sense of culture and caring about someone else or understanding someone else is a thing we did that we're not doing, and so much of this conversation has been around that. So that's what set it off in my mind.
Kaye, you were saying, so I'll share what Peter, you made me think, is that my lens is through creativity and design. And so what, Kaye, you're talking about in terms of getting proximal, getting close to people, my tools for that goes through co-design. So for corporations to, instead of observing people, co-designing with people, and maybe at the societal level, what I find happens is when you get people in a room solving problems together and hearing that they share all sorts of challenges together, that they're not alone in their own world, that really creates a sense of trust, and that, Kaye, what you're talking about, that we're all human. You know,
Mhm.
my tools for that go through creative tools, getting people, for example, to design their life or a portion of their life together and in a room, and through that realizing that we're not alone.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because it's the same methodology. My work involves bringing people together, and through language and inquiry, and maybe it is the co-creation isn't necessarily at their individual level. We're usually talking about designing an organization or a process or something that they are a part of. But having them, because so often, you know, organizations, I call it, they're optimizing the vertical or the silo that they're in. And I think increasingly now we're starting to see that not only is that inefficient, it's not effective, it's not sustainable. So more and more, most of my work now is done and what I do is facilitate bringing people together. And I use language, I use inquiry. I mean, I have one of the clients I have now, are trying to move from an operating model where everybody operates in a silo, big books of business in a silo. And competitively, they will not survive operating that way. So there's the business momentum, but to get them from competition, which is what they were incentivized for, to get them to cooperation, we have to get to the behavioral level, right? Because this is my point about content and character. The content is, we can build the frameworks, we can tell them all of that, but fundamentally, when I'm with them, I am asking them, in the context that you're trying to solve this, what does collaboration look like? What does trust mean? When I see when you see a behavior, what is that behavior? How does that resonate for you? And I use language and I use inquiry as the tool, because generally they are co-creating, or at least attempting to create a different way of being in the organization. And I really try to pull them to being, because the doing part is the easy. And these are really smart people, like you said, Peter. These are engineers, they're scientists, they live in their head, but it's giving them permission to be in a different place. That's about, okay, behaviorally, what does that look like? Can be really challenging because, the systems aren't designed to incentivize being. Systems are incentivized to reward and motivate doing, because people always tell me you can measure the doing. It's hard to measure the being. So I don't subscribe to that.
You just reminded me too. I think this, how do you measure being? And there's a while back we had Kathy O'Neill, who's a mathematician, who actually is asked to come in and evaluate algorithms to see how racist they can be and still be legal by corporations. And she wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. And the point of it, and she was with Sophia Noble, and they both joined us for just a riveting hour and a half conversation about algorithms of oppression. But what she said is that we have built systems, because they're easy to build, that make lucky people luckier and unlucky people unluckier, like in dramatic ways, like at a click of a button and a whole server goes off and we make unlucky people unluckier. And the point about measuring being is, she really talks about, the act of measuring something sometimes kills it or changes it because people start gaming it, because different things happen. And she has a bunch of examples in the book that are kind of stunning, like best intentions, measure the wrong thing, it really goes haywire, and it goes really badly in the wrong way. A future episode, we've got David Sloan Wilson, who's an evolutionary biologist, and he worked with Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize back in 2008, around looking at the tragedy of the commons. How do people share common resources? But she documented how people have actually succeeded in actually finding the bounty of the commons for generations. And she collected a lot of data on it and developed 8 design principles. And David Sloan Wilson, as an evolutionary biologist, started evaluating them. And it turns out that optimizing for the individual unit, like the person or the business unit, leads to unfair behavior, leads to freeloading, leads to all the things you would imagine. But what he calls it in evolutionary science is multi-level selection. If you optimize for, like, here's a chicken coop, and there are 8 chickens in each chicken coop, and you go, I want more eggs. And this is a true story. They did this at Purdue. I want more eggs. And you pick the chicken that lays the most eggs in that 8 chicken thing, and you breed it, the best from each of the coops that lay the most eggs. You get aggressive, evil chickens who eat all the other food and beat the hell everybody down. And egg production goes down. Because what you did was you used the wrong selection level. If you actually say which coop of all 8 produces the most eggs, and then you actually do genetics, you basically breed them, you actually increase production a bunch, because it's multi-level selection in the parlance of evolutionary science. Nature's had 3 billion years to experiment with this, and there are really nice design patterns that nature found. Cooperation exists for a reason. There's a reason we have trust, and we have communities and cities and society. And we've kind of lost a little bit of control, or maybe taken too much control over the evolution of society, and not really understood these underlying patterns. So you just reminded me of that, and I wanted to share.
Mickey, the one about bias in algorithms is one that I am really paying attention to. We've been exploring it at Stanford, of all places, because we use, like many other health systems, we use algorithms to
This is Stanford Health. Yeah.
Stanford Health to optimize the treatment paradigms, right? And depending on, and there was just a big study about this, depending on the bias of the designer of the algorithm, it creates very differential outcomes for protected class members, and it makes it even worse. To your point, we were going down a path of saying, let's take the physician bias out of it. Let's take the system bias out of it. And we ended up, so for me, it's been really, really interesting to see how, to your point, we could have the best intentions, but really end up in a very, very different place than we intended. But that's one that we are very aggressively paying attention to, because we're looking at the outcomes. And the outcomes are telling us something upstream isn't working. And there was a big study just done, I think it was Harvard, just did a big study on this. And when you think about the lack of diversity in the population of scientists that are designing and engineers that are designing these algorithms, that's why you're getting the outcomes, or at least the design is being designed in that way. So,
it's a real challenge.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I think, what has been depressing is there are people like Sophia Noble, like Ruha Benjamin, who just came out with the new Gym Code book and things like that, who have been studying this for more than a decade and a half or two, and who have been walking into Stanford on the school side, not the medical side, walking into Harvard, walking into these places, basically saying your algorithms are racist, your algorithms are doing this. And every single time they're like, that's not possible. It's impossible for an algorithm to be racist. Yeah. And now, we get the Center for Humane AI at Stanford. There's not one person from that crew of people who did the research that's actually on the board. There's not one person in the room. It's a bunch of people that you would describe in nice terms as tech bros. And, there's a danger there that is even the new Netflix documentary, which we're going to talk about in another episode, The Social Dilemma. It's basically, I think, and Peter might disagree, but I think it's basically like a prodigal son story of tech bros, done wrong, and now they've seen something better. And aside from a little bit of a blessing of some diverse thoughts, it sounds like, well, we broke it, we're the technologists, we should fix it. And I wonder if that's true. So we need to have a deeper conversation about that. What I like, at least, is that it's becoming visible. It's we have to see the problem. Okay, I want to do my last little silly superhero thing. Peter,
we
you're
want
the
to
target
see
of it.
that.
I want to see that.
So
Have you
if
seen
you
it, Peter?
if
I have seen it. What you're about to see
Okay.
I don't know if we have a video of the reveal of the whole thing, but it's all quite
I don't
remarkable.
have it. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So
And then, by the
I
way,
have a project. Go ahead.
I have the video of the Internet of Things and Peter's mother to follow this.
Please,
which
please.
That's the ending. Okay.
I will
You're going to
stick
take us
around
out with
for
that. Mohib, can you shift over? Okay. So I have a project called the Superhero Project that I've been doing for about 20 years. And at Maya, the lab I was at, we would have all the directors had to pick somebody in their team, in their discipline, a human scientist or whatever, or in a different team. And they would spend a weekend building a superhero of that person. And when I say a superhero, I mean a box, a 12-inch fit character. They'll take like a Barbie doll and change the hair color and put clothes on. And so I said, I heard it was Peter's birthday. And Peter's a kind of journalist techno weenie, if you could look behind his desk. So I said, there has to be like little like vacuum tubes from the 1950s, Nixie tubes. He should be holding a coronavirus in his hand, because quarantine, the episodes are always about like this quarantine. It might be cool if he's got a microphone that says quarantine on it. So he's got that. And then it would be cool if there were like a little, I'll see if I can draw on this. I don't know if I can. If there were like a little switch here that you could switch and it would change through different episodes and project them on the wall. Like it would show him interviewing people. So this was a silly idea that came up a day after I found out it was his birthday. But I've been doing the Superhero Project for 20 years now. So there's a long history of just hacking on the weekend. And so this was the sketch. This was the box that I took over to Peter's house. Atelier Hirschberg. And of course it has like some warnings over in the lower corner. It says dead guests not included, because Peter likes to have dead guests on all the time, like Marshall McLuhan and things like that. Does not contain live virus, voice activated Peterbotic accessory sold separately. Yeah, okay. So I handed it to Peter. Peter, can you tell us what happened when you got the box?
Yes, well, you asked me to guess what was in the box.
Yeah, what's in the box?
Now, it wasn't that difficult, because it was clearly a control panel with a virus and evidently me in the middle. But it's very tough to imagine that this thing actually exists. So we opened the box, and startlingly, shall we see what was in it? It was this giant system.
So hold on, I'm going to actually go to this one.
Yeah.
So here's the close-up. There's Peter in the box holding the coronavirus, although he can swap the world out for the coronavirus, and if he wants to do an episode on America or the world. And that's Marshall McLuhan. So he switched the switch, and suddenly Marshall McLuhan, one of his favorite dead guests, is projected on the back wall, and he starts talking about the medium is the massage, because that's actually what Marshall McLuhan said. The medium is the massage. It massages our brain to think something different back in the 60s. And so Peter just set it up in his living room. Here it is. And this took just a few weekends of fun.
And we should point out that one can control the lighting. So it can be a garish white or a subtle orange or a seductive red. And then it can go to the living room in that. Also,
there's a Burning Man mode as well. But yeah, we don't have to talk about that. It's like psychedelic. Crazy.
Also, its settings in terms of the videos. One was Marshall McLuhan, where we took a deep dive into our media environment, which we live in. Another was a series of quarantines. One was Donella Meadows, who was talking to us about systems design and complexity, which we brought up earlier. And then the final one was a very optimistic, techno-optimistic piece from the 1950s with a stentorian voice talking about the future. So I set this thing up the other day and set it in the corner, and this clip about the future was going on. It turns out that clip had inspired me. I was doing a project with a venture capital firm, and we were doing a documentary on its portfolio companies and how it was getting the future right around infrastructure. And I was so focused in my work, this for about 3 hours, the same 20 seconds played, until I realized that was insane. But the machine, it just goes. So there it is. It is.
It's a little fun. What did you feel? What did you feel, Peter, when you got a birthday gift that was made for you about you?
Mostly
as a superhero?
just a whole lot of humbleness and love. Like, that was amazing. because like one had never seen it before, largely because they don't have them at Toys R Us. They don't even have Toys R Us anymore. But no,
I
it
told
was
them I
just
bought it at Target or
amazing,
something. I don't know.
like such an amazing expression of creation. And of course, you got all those things, right? I could see being heard and seeing me in all sorts of things, like the Nixie tubes and the silly stentorian voices and the
Yeah, just look behind
so
Peter, and you can see all sorts
awesome.
of tube-based weirdness and stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
the
It was
best
really
part
fun.
was-
We had to do social distance,
Yeah.
so we're wearing masks, and
Mm.
I'm just like
Yeah.
dropping it off. I'm like, I can't touch it now. It's yours.
The next
So this is
day,
a process that we've done though for a number of years. So I even just bumped into a designer in Consumer Electronics Show one year, and I told her about this. This is her action figure that she made for her wife. And she has
Wow.
a flamethrower that says heart melter because she grew up in Missouri and her parents are rabid Republicans. And she fell in love with her wife while being bridesmaids for her sister. And her Republican parents found out how much they loved each other because they could see how much love they put into helping the sister. And so I told her about who would you make, who is a superhero in your life? She said, it's my wife. How did you meet? And we were just talking. And I said, well, I just will never talk to you again unless you make an action figure of her and give it to her. And then you got to send me a picture. And she did. And I had not seen her ever again. And Ayse asked me to join for her superheroes tea. And I sent a note off and she answered and sent me pictures and she joined Ayse's tea after 15 years. She's a innovation, designer, etc. So this has been going on for a long time. Bonin, actually, his mom wrote his origin story, and it's kind of a beautiful origin story. And he got this for Christmas under the Christmas tree. His girlfriend wrapped it and put it under there. But I asked his mom to write the origin story, and it turned out to be. I think the interesting thing I'm saying here is that
did Bonin get? Was it
Bonin?
Bonin?
Well, Bonin. Yeah, so Bonin was a junior astronaut. So he grew up in New York, and his mom was very worried that he'd be a statistic.
Look at that.
And so she sent him to space camp in Alabama when he was a teenager, and he loved Legos from the time he was very young. So here he is actually, when he's young, building things out of Legos. I photoshopped in the space shuttle because it didn't exist as a Lego back then. But she wrote this, and it was kind of a weird, beautiful thing about how he got his superpowers. He was having a birthday, and you don't have to read it here, but one of the kids at the birthday party came running over because the crown that every kid got was torn. And the kid's crown was torn and broken. And Bonin, at the age of, a very young age, 9 or something, basically takes the crown off his own head, puts it on the kid's head and says, nobody cries at my party. And I have to tell you, that is his superpower. Like if you ever meet Bonin, he is all about celebrating everybody around him. And, he actually was reverse mentoring Indra maybe at the time when he was head of digital for Pepsi at this moment. So this was, so of course he's carrying Pepsi with him. But, he is sort of, he's indicative, and just, it was just the fun of actually enlisting everybody else to help. So Ayse and I have a plan to do this with high school kids, where they have to pick a hero in their life.
Basically, my kids and their friends.
That's cool.
And anybody who we invite, and then just work on them on the narrative over the weekend, so they make something to give to their mom or their teacher or something.
Cool.
So that's our plan after the COVID. So we're pulling back, and I think we're ready for Peter's last video. This is today. We can probably take the whiteboard off screen. Ayse, that was fun. We've never done that before. It was an experiment.
I want to point out that because participation is so important, the day after Mickey gave me that, it broke. The projector wouldn't go on, the lights wouldn't go. So I called him up. I said,
I'm not really that great with electrical engineering, by the way.
Is this atelier support? And then Mickey walked me through replacing the USB power supply and getting into it. So now I feel some set of participation with.
Yeah, he called and he said, I'm calling for Atelier Hirschberg support. Is this the support line? And I was like, yes, sir. Give me a moment and let me connect you to our technical staff. And he literally was roaming around the house trying to find a USB power supply, and he plugs it in. I'm like, take a screwdriver, remove the back. And he did it, and now it's working again because
That's cool.
virtual.
That's
Okay.
It was like Glide on the go, but it was just
There you go.
silliness.
There you go.
That's just great. And the
Okay,
sad
Peter,
thing
take
is,
us out.
because we're socially distant, I can't invite anybody over to see it. So I have to come up with that. Hey, Mohib, do you see the video that I uploaded to Brand, which is the Internet of Thing and Peter's mother? Don't play it yet. I want to make sure you just have it ready to go. Give me a thumbs up if you got it ready to go. Okay, well, he's looking for that. Let's see. It's sitting there in Brands. It's under videos. It's under video clips. And
He has it. He says
good.
thumbs
He has
up.
it, I think. It's
All right.
by the way, it's
so
Mohib today.
Here's the story. It's about 3-4 years ago. It's Christmas, and there's a company called Quirky, which is in the making business that I think GE invested in, that made small run of interesting products. And they were experimenting with goofy Internet of Things. And so I got one for my brother, and my mom, who was about 90 at the time, was trying to figure out exactly what this stuff was. And I was trying to explain it to her. So now, why don't we go to the Internet of Things and Peter's mother, not so many Christmases
Mohib,
ago.
play it all the way to the very end to the credits. Because
Oh, yeah. It has a false ending.
Through.
So just keep going.
It has a false ending.
I tell you it's over. Right. Yeah. I got you a device that reads the data of the eggs in your life. What kind of metadata surrounds eggs?
When you bought them, how many there are. I would like to know if it could tell me if they're cracked, but I don't think it can.
To really understand this, to put this in context, I decided to ask my mother, who's been around at more Christmases than most of us, what she thought about all of this Internet of Things stuff for Christmas. Now the computer is spilling out from your desktop, and now it's going into the refrigerator as well.
And in the refrigerator, it's telling her about her eggs
Yes.
from the computer.
The refrigerator and the eggs are a computer.
The refrigerator's not a computer.
It is now. It's becoming a computer because the intelligence is being moved out into things, including the refrigerator.
So she can put that egg thing right in the refrigerator and it's going to tell her.
Over Wi-Fi, so when she's shopping for eggs, she'll know the condition of all the eggs.
She has to have a Wi-Fi.
No, she has to have an iPhone which communicates with her eggs by Wi-Fi.
Oh, dear me.
And there you have it.
I think I'm better to take the old carton and stick it in there and look at the date on the carton. Is that all right?
It's not just Christmas. It's a very meta Christmas. This is a digital dashboard to keep track of your life.
My life? We better do it quickly. Because
Okay,
it ain't
so-
going to be around very long. But you got so many gadgets. Where are you going to put the new gadget?
I don't know.
Huh?
I don't know.
Oh,
You
Lord.
better do it quickly.
Move fast.
Oh,
Well,
you made my day. You made my day.
Yeah, you know.
better do it quick. Ayse, you're on mute.
Aisha's on mute. Come back. Welcome.
Sorry, I was just saying, Peter, you need your mom on the show.
Yeah.
Seriously.
A few years before that, she didn't have a personal computer. And my brother lives in New York. We didn't want her to have one because, like, there'd be a lot of support questions. But then she got really smart about it. And she said to me one day, you know, Peter, I'll be getting old soon. It'll be more isolating. I have to connect with people. You want me to connect with people, and personal computers accomplish that, right? And I'm like, okay, she's figured it out. And so, but my brother was against it. So she conspired with me to give it to her at Christmas. And so I show up with this box, and my mother is just smiling like the Cheshire Cat. My brother figures it out before it's even open. And so that was a joke that we played on my brother. And it was when MySpace was still big. And so I gave her a computer, and she had her own MySpace page. And she said, what do I do with this? I said, it's your social network. And she goes, how many people can see this? I said, I don't, Mom, if it's 2 or 3 billion people on the earth. And she looks at me and goes, the last thing I need at my age is a bigger social network. I got enough friends. So she's always said this.
I got enough. Ayse, Kaye, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time with us and sharing stories. I just loved it, and I thought it was just such a fun, and I am addicted to both of you. So just beautiful.
Likewise.
That was
And
great.
Ayse, I will be calling you.
I love it, Kaye. Please do. And
And Mickey,
we
thank
have
you.
a plan. Yeah, Mickey.
Yes, we have a
That
plan.
was great.
And maybe even you too, Peter. Don't think you're going to get away. You are
No,
now
and I
part.
hope we can get together for socially distanced coffee.
Something. You let me know.
Very soon.
Coffee
You
is
let
not
me
going to
know.
let you off the
You're
hook
part
there,
of my
Peter.
tribe now, so you can't get away. Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you so
Have
much.
a great
This was
weekend.
too much fun. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Mohit.
Bye-bye.
And thank you,
And
Mohit.
thank you, Mohid.
Bye-bye.
Mickey,
Mick, it's-
Peter,
tell
take us out.
Take care.
hi. I said hello.
Thanks.
I
Ciao.
will.
Mick, it's 5:50 Pacific quarantine, and I don't think we actually have the ending this time because we didn't download it. So we get to do a very
I'm not
authentic,
singing it.
untechnological ending. Maybe next time
Okay.
we'll get Drew Youngs on the show to perform the song live.
Okay.
Live. Or maybe
Let's
we'll do
do
that
that.
on our 50th show, which is coming up the day after or 2 days after the election day. I don't know if the day after election day is a good time because people just may not know what to do, but maybe 2 days later will be our 50th show.
Do you have anything you want to talk about in terms of the next few episodes?
Yeah, I think the next 7 shows leading up to this, we're clearly counting down to tomorrow. We're counting down to what the future is, and it also strikes me that we're in this era of uncertainty, and we've talked about moving from enlightenment to entanglement. Danny Hillis's piece of writing. We've talked about the fact that we're relating science differently. So I think we want to do a series of shows that look at how we can deal with an uncertain future. A lot of the technology things we've talked about early on with COVID, how do we apply them to the broader political thing, preparing for what's next, which could be. The interesting thing is I originally thought, well, the future is going to arrive on November 3rd. And then, of course, everything we're reading says we're just going to enter a period of turmoil, not only because of election results and disputes, and then how does the Constitution work? So we will be talk about a nation rolling its own. I think we want to get ready for that.
Well, I think if 2020 is going to remain on brand, it's got to go until at least 2024.
Yeah.
Take us out.
All right, that's it. Thank you. It's 5:52 Pacific quarantine, and we're going to see everybody next time. Bye-bye.